So let's get moving here. Christine's got shit to do.
Let's go, girl. That's good. Well, and again, so I guess, what I really want to, I don't want this to be a kind of a rudimentary conversation about how to do a lease. This is about, like, we're in a very specific moment right now, and there's lots of leases. Leases are, the value of leases are going up from all that I can see, and there are a lot of people who were in the buying market that are falling into, that are falling out and maybe looking for some conciliatory, higher end lease. And so I guess my first question to you guys would be, where are we right now in the leasing environment? What are the let's start on the lessor side, right? What are the challenges that landlords are facing right now in leasing their properties?
I'll take that.
Okay.
Yeah.
The main thing is to find people that are not going to pull anything related to the eviction moratorium.
Correct.
And so the follow-up question to that is, how do you protect your client from that?
I would say usually these people will have a lease history. They've leased before. You're going to do a background check on them. Hopefully they're going to be gainfully employed. And my understanding, I have a client who has, if not thousands, at least hundreds of rental units, all up and down Southern California. And he basically said that, if my default rate was 3% before the pandemic, maybe it's 6% now. It hasn't been a large population of people who go, that's it, I'm not paying, I'm going to ride this out. But if it's one of yours, it's a pain in the neck, for sure.
Absolutely.
The other thing, other than doing the background check, and this is just kind of a silly thing, you run, and I got it from Sharlotte, was Rent Spree. Great. But I don't know if you do this, Sharlotte, but I know I do it with mine. And when I have other leases, I run a Google search on the person. I run a Google search, and you find, I had someone that looked great, awesome, da-da-da-da. And all of a sudden I pulled up mug shots where they'd had a meth lab somewhere that blew up. And it was like, sayonara, so you don't know what you're going to turn up with that. But that's my 2 cents. Do your research.
Google and Instagram your friends for sure, always, when you're doing investigation.
Mm-hmm.
It's honestly seriously tricky right now, to the point where I can tell you I'm considering, if I get to a point where I can do this, of actually selling my property and moving rental properties out of state. It is a terrible place to be a landlord right now. And Nitya Ram and Mike Bonin are trying to make it worse, and they're trying to make it harder. And I understand where it's coming from, but they are taking the fair housing to an extreme where it's going to, if they pass it, which I'm very hopeful they do not, going to be putting landlords in a position where you are unable to protect yourself. And I think that being aware of such things is important.
Mm-hmm.
They're trying to pass.
Yeah, tell them what they're trying to do, Sharlotte.
Yeah, do you have a number, like whatever ordinance they're trying to pass?
I'd have to look it up. I just read it the other day. They're trying to pass it. Like I said, it's being authored by Mike Bonin and Nitwit. This is being recorded, right? Great. Sorry. I'm not a fan of hers. But basically they're trying to make it so that you cannot use credit to determine a credit score, to determine if someone can rent. You cannot use any, basically anything. You basically have to rent to whoever says, I want the place. Pretty much what it, what it comes down to.
Well,
Obviously, I'm not going to do that, but these are the laws they're trying to pass. There's also some scuttlebutt out there that they're trying to pass something. I don't actually know if it's the same people that, not COVID related, but they're trying to make something in the city of Los Angeles on a long-term basis that kind of fall on hard times that they don't have to pay their rent. And that's unacceptable as far as I'm concerned. I mean, these are investments that we and our clients make. And, you know, if we wanted to build homeless housing, we would be developers that would build homeless housing and give it away.
Yeah. And that's the problem, isn't it? They're dealing with the symptom, not the source of the problem, right? It's like, we need more affordable housing for sure, right? But to force people who own properties to devalue the leasing potential is not the way to do that.
Well,
Right? I feel comfortable saying that.
I mean, for me, the main issue, I'm not like Tim's client that owns, you know, hundreds or thousands.
Yeah.
And I have 3. And if the tenant doesn't pay, I can't pay my mortgage, and nobody is protecting me with that. So I have to protect myself. And I think depending on agents and their clients and what they're leasing and what, it's like anything. It's like buying or selling. What are your goals?
Yeah.
That's the question. What are your goals? Because do you want a high-paying tenant who maybe will stay for a year or 2 and then move on, and you get another high-paying tenant? That may be their goal. I have a neighbor who owns a couple buildings across the street from mine who has owned these buildings since the 70s. She loves the old stuff, i.e. she does no upgrades. All she wants are tenants that are easy, that aren't going to bother her. That's all she wants. She charges under market. She basically gives them, here's the plumber, here's the electrician, don't call me. And they'll send me the bill. She never, ever raises the rent. She's had people in those buildings for 20 and 30 years.
Yeah.
They're not like the greatest places to live, but they're not tenements either.
She gets what she wants out of it.
That's the point. And that's the point. Not everybody wants the same thing. If you're representing a landlord, don't make the assumption that everybody wants the same thing.
Right.
Some people buy income property for the write-off. They don't care about the rents. They just want to make sure that that it's not a hassle. Some people are looking for an upside in value. I mean, it really, it depends, like it does with everything else we do, as to what people's end goals are.
Right.
Christina, again.
I was just going to say, I fall somewhere maybe in the middle between the two. I also have a rental property. I have 2 units. So yeah, if one goes vacant, it's 50% of the income. But and I recommend this to anyone that wants to lease through me, their property. I go just a tad under market. Not, if it's a $4,000 a month place, I'll go like $3,800. Just under. You cast a wider net. Instead of getting 2 or 1 applicant, you get a half a dozen, and you can pick the most qualified. And they also will probably stay more than 1 year. They might stay 3 years. And I bump it 3% every year that I can. It's not a lot, but they're a good tenant. They stay. And, if you're vacant for 1 month, 2 months, that's, again, that's, what is it, $7,600 that you're out. So I try and explain those dynamics to anyone that's buying rental property for the first time. That's how I explain it to them. That's I tell them what my system, my theory on the whole thing is. Then they can take the advice or not. It's up to them.
But I think you also have to be aware of what does it mean to be at market with a rental. It's not that obvious the way it is with sales. Most sales are on the MLS. Most rentals are not. So it's very hard to truly determine the comps.
Well, wait a minute. You've had your place for a long time, right? in that neighborhood, I would assume I don't want to get in an argument here, but I would assume you have a pretty good idea what everybody's renting for in your neighborhood, what the value is there. Now, again,
Sure, in my neighborhood, but if I was an agent looking for comps, an agent called me the other day and she's looked at the comps on the MLS for $4,000, $4,500 property. That to me, in a neighborhood where you don't own something, that you don't actually keep an eye on things, that's not necessarily an indication of comps. I mean, Christina's doing a lot of rentals in condo buildings where she does a lot of rentals, so she knows. But that's my point, is Zillow, which feeds out to Trulia and Hot Pads, and apartments.com currently are the main two places where people get the rentals. They're not looking with their agent necessarily.
No.
Because agents spend a lot of time on rentals. So there's a lot of mom and pop landlords that will, or property management people that will put their properties, this building behind me on Fuller, there's a building next door to me. They're, 6, 8 unit buildings, the one across the street. I've got people on my block that still just stick a sign in the ground.
Nothing wrong with that. Nothing wrong with that.
But the point is, unless you really are keeping an eye on a particular neighborhood from a comp perspective, you may not know.
Right.
Well, Charlotte, I beg to differ. And the reason why I say that is because I do a lot of comps, not particularly isolated in one area. I do rentals for all over from Palisades all the way down to downtown LA. So, and I've never had problems comping anything out. There's always been ample enough information. We may not have the supporting comps as much as a sale would. And yes, I agree with that. But I think there's still enough information to support a general idea of what direction, what level you should be at, surprisingly still. And I do run into those moms and pops that are renting out. They'll put it on Zillow or something and they're not co-oping with an agent. I call them up and I ask them, because I'll have a client that says, hey, I saw this on Zillow, can you make an appointment? And we find out that it's, leased by owner. I've had more opportunities where I've called them and I said, hey, I've got a client who's interested and I wanted to understand where your position is as far as cooperating with an agent. And they'll first say, well, we haven't really thought about it, or we're actually trying to lease it on our own. And I say, well, I understand that. And I give them the whole spiel on why they need to contract an agent and why it's in their best interest is because there's a lot of legal documents that pertain to a lease, even though it's not a sale. So I advise them that this is where, that I'll tell them what my value comes in. I will conduct and oversee all of the legal documents to protect both parties, to provide them the information that they should know as a landlord, for instance, the credit reports, like the past references, making sure that we check all of those things. And then once the clients have and then I ask them, who's going to lease, who's going to draft up that lease? They don't have access to car documents. So this is another form of leverage that I bring and value that I bring. And more times than not, if my client commits to them, even though it's leased by owner, they'll still work with me. They'll still compensate me as long as I can facilitate the transaction. So that's the value that I bring, even with for lease. And once you start talking to them and kind of give them a gist of all of the legal documents and the contracts and the process of that transaction, it does get a little over their head. They don't realize exactly what they're getting themselves into. And then they'll say, you know what, actually, if your client does like it, then we are very open to working with you and having you facilitate the transaction. So more times than not, I do have that opportunity. Another thing is like with leasing, as far as like the landlord's perspective of wanting to find that ideal tenant that's not going to screw them, not screw up the property and all that. It is an absolute gamble. I mean, it's an absolute gamble, and I get that, but you know, you want to eliminate your risk as much as possible. And the more extensive research you do on them, the more you cross-qualify them, the less risk that you are taking on or your client is taking on, right? So when Tim said that he Googles them, I absolutely Google them. Another thing I do is I don't allow them to send me a snapshot of their credit report, because that number means nothing unless you know the history of their payment history. So I've had people that their credit doesn't seem bad, but when I pull up the actual report, I'll see they didn't pay for a Macy's credit card payment that was only $12. Or I'll see that they did make a payment of something that was only like $120. So if I see a repeated history of them not paying for certain things of minuscule amounts, it already sets off a red flag for me, you know? So that's where I would, you know, make sure, and also go to the extent of cross-qualifying who their current landlord is, who their previous landlord is, and even cross-qualify who their friends are, you know? So I look all of that up, and I want to make sure, and sometimes people will make bogus informations on those applications. So you want to make sure that the landlord of the property that they say is actually the name that they provided, right? So that you can make sure that they're not giving you their friend's phone number and saying that that's the landlord, because that's also something that you have to also take into consideration, that people are not going to be totally honest up front, you know?
Right.
And be happy that we're in 2022, because I can tell you in 2001, you couldn't do that.
I know, it was the
I
horse.
had a terrible tenant for 7 years who put down his business partner as his landlord, who said wonderful things about him.
Yeah.
And there wasn't any way at that time for me as a mom and pop landlord to find out that information. Now I'm still going to counter what Christina said, because I'm still going to stick to what I said about comping, because I think, Christina, if you're dealing with single families, if you're dealing with condos, you're absolutely correct. I'm talking about small mom and pop multi-units. I'm talking about RSO properties, the properties that are comparable to mine, the properties that Dragon deals with, probably similar to Tim's. These people have had these properties for 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years. They don't want to hear from you. As an agent, you can say to them, if you're representing a tenant, you can go down the road Christina went through, but those types of landlords, I can't tell you how many people that came to me before I was an agent. No, I'm sorry, I don't pay commission. My prices are what they are. And if your client wants it, great. They can pay your commission. That's the way it works in New York City.
So if you have that conversation with your clients in the very beginning, which is something that I would recommend you do, so what you do is you have that realistic conversation and say, look, I'm going to do the best that I can to find you the right property that you guys are looking for. But we are going to run into cases where the owner is not cooperating or advertising through a real estate agent. Now, in the case that this happens, I will still try to take the initiative to, in a normal scenario where it's listed by an agent, the compensation of my commission is paid by the landlord. Now, if it's in a case where this is not the normal scenario, then I would require that the compensation come directly from the tenant. Now, if you guys are comfortable with that, then we will proceed and continue to even explore opportunities where they're not cooperating with agents. But if you don't want to limit the options that you may have, because I would still be batting for you, I would still do my best to get your application accepted. So I actually know a couple of agents in our office that have that conversation right off the bat. So, and they've been compensated by the tenant themselves in the scenario that they've chosen a property that is not a landlord cooperating with an agent. So it's just
myself. When I was a newer agent and I was getting lease clients, I did that myself, and had the same conversation Christina's talking about with the condo owner. His mother happened to be a Los Angeles real estate agent, but it was not on the MLS. It was just on Zillow. I ended up dealing with both sides of the deal and handling the whole thing for my clients, and my clients compensated me. Is the amount of money significant enough? They're the reason that in my case, Probably not. I don't do enough leases that it really makes a difference. I do leases for clients for other reasons and for relationship reasons. I just helped, I'll say. I did not execute the lease. I was not representing the tenant. I had clients that needed a rental. They were supposed to leave the state. They didn't. And they had gotten into a bad situation with their house, and that's why they sold it. And I know as a landlord, I would not have rented to them. I would not have rented to someone with bad credit and no proof of past income for the last few years. A lot of cash in the bank, but bad credit, 2 kids, 2 dogs. I would have said big fat no. They needed a house. So I told them, go to the listing agent, write with the listing agent, have them guide you, because they want both sides of this deal. Tell them you'll pay a year up front if you need to, because I wouldn't rent to you. On paper, you look terrible. And that's what they did, and they got the house. So that's a service that I just, as information, would provide to a client. I wasn't the agent on the deal because they wouldn't have gotten the house if I was. So
Right.
that's my side of it.
And I just want to say, Charlotte, I think you bring up a good point. Doing leases, and maybe, Christina will say the same thing. A lot of it is about you're building a relationship with this person that has this income property, or the person that's renting this property, because they're not going to be renting it forever. They're hopefully going to be buying. And the other is, again, they're not maybe going to hold this income property forever. They're going to be selling. So it is about building the relationships. So, I mean, I know I have very, very good friends, and like very close friends. We just went on vacation together, and they have a property and they want to rent one of the units in the property. And I said to them, look, I won't take a commission, but I'll put it on there on the MLS. It'll get picked up everywhere else, and then you'll get as many clients, and I'll just direct them right to you. You take care of it, and they're fine with that, and I'm fine with that because they own multiple properties. Eventually, they're going to sell it, and who's going to be their real estate agent when they decide to sell? Hopefully, me. But it's about the relationship, keeping the relationship.
So I completely agree with that. I don't have someone calling me and say, hey, Christina, I want to lease my property. Can you help me? And I don't jump on those things because leasing is more headache than not. And it's the same amount of work, almost comparable with the least amount of return. So the reason why I handle a lot of leases is because I have a lot of investors. So one of the caveat services that I provide for my clients is that once we buy the income property, whatever it may be, I will put the tenants in them for them. If it's a multi-unit, then I do charge the services. If it's like one unit and I'm just finding a tenant for them, it really depends. If it's like an investor who purchased like 3 or 4 properties from me annually, then I won't charge on the listing side unless I have to. But I'll still provide a buyer side commission for that, But again, like I don't really go out to do leases, but yes, it's an absolute relationship reason why seasoned agents do it, especially if you don't really have the time to do it. But the reason why you do it is because of those relationships that you have with the homeowners, because like Sharlotte said, eventually they will sell, right? And I'm going to tell you, depending on the price point of your lease as well, like if it's under 3,000 and under, I don't focus too much on that price point. But if you've got clients that are looking in the 6,000, 7,000s and above, that they have enough monthly income eventually to support a purchase. So I had a client who I met, one of my listings, she came with a Redfin agent. She didn't get the property. She happened to call me again for something else. And then I happened to run into her. We started talking. She wanted to see a property. I said, that's fantastic. She was in the 6,500 price point. And we just started talking, and she said, I want to know what it would take to prep for a purchase eventually sooner down the line. I said, let me coordinate you with my lender. She coordinated with the lender that day. Following day, we found out that she could actually purchase. We're in the market to purchase now. So you just never know what opportunity will happen from a lease. It can go from anywhere from just a minuscule lease opportunity to a purchase, or it could, and then, or if you rent someone out, one other thing that my team member does is that she cultivates the tenants. We put the tenants in, even if they're agent reps, we have conversations with them. We follow up with them on a quarterly basis to make sure, one, are they happy still there? Is there any problems? Is there any issues that we should be aware of? And she cultivates that relationship with them, because when the time comes and they want to now venture off to purchasing, we've already established rapport. We've already kind of brought value as far as our communication wise is concerned. And I also provide information separately for my renters. For instance, like, what are the pros and cons of renting? What are the things that you should know about, like the lending process and so on and so forth. I do send in a lot of informational emails to them as well to eventually nurture them into that process. So.
Excellent. So Joey had started out talking about the hurdles we have to overcome with the COVID. Now, my understanding right now is, what we have the state, the county, and the city all had COVID rules. And my understanding right now is the most restrictive is the city.
LA.
LA City. And for eviction and for even rental increases, isn't it? It's not till 12 months after the emergency has been declared over that you could evict someone or increase their rent. Am I right about that? Does anybody have more information on that?
No, that's correct. That's
I
correct.
thought it was just through the end of this calendar.
So right now they're saying it's the end of this year.
The repayment of past due rent, I believe, is 12 months after.
Right. Well, I'm talking for a current landlord. I have a property. My tenants have been in there. I haven't been able to raise the rent for whatever time. I don't believe I'm going to be able to raise their rent until 12 months after the emergency has been declared over. So now that seems to be 20.
It is currently now, but that was a new law that was passed on January 25th. There was a window before that where you could have.
Okay.
I understand. Well, I did.
Yeah. I mean, that meant maybe that was county. Dragona, you're muted unless you're not talking to us.
Yeah. No, I was just saying, I'm not sure if that freeze on rent increases and an eviction moratorium or rent increases is still valid for single family residences and condo owners.
Right. I'm talking about, I was talking about apartments or duplexes.
All of these restrictions have a probably more nuances than any of us are in a position to discuss today.
Right.
Because I know a lot of it has to do with whether it's single family condo, how long they've lived there, when did the lease start. There's a lot of, and it kind of keeps getting tweaked and it keeps getting changed and it keeps getting interpreted. Currently, my understanding is the only true way to evict someone is for something like a nuisance, criminality, something along those lines.
I think health violation.
Sorry?
Health violation.
Yeah, I have
who's
an eviction attorney who primarily deals with RSOs, and she's very, very busy evicting people for drugs and nuisances, party. She's busy, so it is still happening.
Right.
It's not the typical, you haven't paid your rent, here's your 3-day pay or quit. You haven't paid your rent, here's your 60 days. That's what's on hold.
Correct. And I know it also came with certain things like if somebody got a roommate, you couldn't evict them for getting someone that wasn't on the lease in the place. And you also, if they got a dog and it was no pets, then you couldn't evict them. Those were some of the rules that came in during the pandemic.
I do believe, and maybe Dragona, maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I do believe, though, if they get a roommate, that you can raise the rent by 10% still, if that person wasn't originally on the lease. Maybe you may not be able to say at the beginning, they said you couldn't do anything because families were losing homes because of jobs and they were moving in with each other. But I don't think that's still the case. But I think this is probably a tangent that we shouldn't go down on this class because I don't think any of us really know.
Yeah.
Right. I would
Like
get
so
an
fluid
attorney on
and
that.
changes all the time. Like you are right about the city being like the strictest because a lot of these measures have been taken by the state and the county, but the city of LA still.
What I mentioned at the beginning of this meeting was not COVID related. I'm more concerned about the proposals that Bon and Raman are putting forward to create restrictions on this on a permanent basis.
Right.
Christina, I had a question for you. I'm curious, since you work with a lot of investors who buy like income properties, you know, and I don't know if they're all like zoned as income, properties or not. Curious, like, what do you need to do? Like, how do you like register these units? Whether you decide to like rent them long term or whether you want to do like through Airbnb options and like and so forth. Like, what's that process?
What are you asking?
I'm asking you, like, I was curious if or anybody else on this call.
So Airbnb is a little tricky because you know that you can't, you know what I mean? So you have to register if you want to be an Airbnb provider. So, and you have to qualify, your property has to qualify, and they have all of these segments. So if you were ever to consider Airbnb, or if your client is considering Airbnb, please look thoroughly into the requirements and the conditions of that property and location for that property to qualify. Now,
jurisdiction is different too. So the city of LA is different from West Hollywood.
Venice,
Correct.
West Hollywood, yeah, they're all different.
So you have to actually connect with Airbnb directly to get all of their requirements. Now, anything beyond Airbnb, it's got to be a minimum of 30-day rental, right? To alleviate, so that you're not restricted by the Airbnb restrictions of whatever that part of town is. So 30 day is a minimum lease that you would have to do. My investors on a more regular basis would prefer a long-term tenant because they don't want to have to deal with it. One of the things that I happen to run into with short-term tenants is that they come in, they fuck up the property. Not that they fuck up the property, but there's things, there's scratches, there's nicks, stuff like that, right? But it costs the same to put the property back into condition when you have the next tenant in place, because it's not like you're going to leave it there and then you're going to say every tenant that comes in, they're coming in as is. That's not how it works.
How do you define short-term?
Short-term, I've defined anything under 1 year to be short-term.
Okay, so I would not, because I actually had short-term rentals, which are defined as what you would call Airbnbs. And legally, short-term is defined as under 30 days. There's a definition of a rental under 29 days does not create a tenancy. As most of you know, when you're doing a purchase with a lease back, we often try to keep that lease back. And I'm like looking at Ashley because she's the only one I can see on this. When you do a lease back, we try to keep it under 29 days so that we're not establishing a tenancy. Once a tenancy is established, all of those factors of evictions and moratoriums, all these things start to come into play, whatever, level of it is applicable. Airbnb, for the sake, it's sort of like using the word Kleenex for facial tissues. It's just a term, but they really are called STRs. They are short-term rentals, and they're under 20 days. Now, I know a lot of people do exactly what Christina says, and they define a short-term rental as something under a year. Also, keep in mind, different jurisdictions have different guidelines as far as rentals in general. For example, if you have a condo building that allows rentals, they may require that the rental be at least a year long. It's important to know all this, and I'm sure Christina definitely does when she's renting to an investor.
Condos all have established a master CCNR, and all condos in that CCNR will require a minimum of 30 days rental.
Yeah,
minimum.
usually even a lot longer than 6 months, you know, like that's, you know, I haven't.
It depends. The
less.
bottom line is it depends. Some
Yeah.
condos, they will say, yes, you can rent after you've lived there for a year, and only 30% of the building can be rental
Right.
unit. You have to get
Yeah.
approved. I mean, they're all a little bit different. The majority of them have outlawed short-term rentals, i.e. Airbnbs. But I have occasionally seen a listing pop up that says you can do it. That said, in the city of Los Angeles, the rule to do a short-term rental is that it has to be your primary residence, and you cannot do it for more than 120 days. If you do it for more than 120 days, you can apply for an exemption that allows you to go further. They will basically send out a little mailing or whatever to all your neighbors and make sure that your short-term rental is not a problem for the neighborhood. They have not been doing a very good job of enforcing this, but that is technically the law as it was put into effect a few years ago. That's pretty much when I got out of that business, because I was doing short-term rentals. I was a very, very picky person with my short-term rentals, so I never had any problems with them. And I found actually that my units were maintained much better with short-term rentals than with long-term tenants, because people come in for vacation and they're there for a week, and you're careful to make sure you're not getting partiers. They're never there. They sleep there like a hotel. And so I didn't even have to paint these places for 5 years, but that's not the law now, so it doesn't matter. I believe Santa Monica has banned them completely. I believe West Hollywood has banned them completely. Another thing that's happened, which is also something to check, I see a lot of listings where they say perfect ADU. You can convert your garage into an ADU. ADU adds rental income, adds value. Be very, very, very careful when advising your clients on ADUs. If you have a house from 1920, and it's a beautiful house, and then you create an ADU in your backyard to use as rental income, you have now put the house from 1920 into the rent stabilization ordinance. So if you end up choosing to rent out that property, all of the RSO things that Tim and I were talking about will now apply to that house. So anything built prior to 1978, a multi-unit, even if it's illegal, even if the garage conversion is illegal but it's been rented out, it still puts the property into the RSO, and that changes your ability to evict. It changes a lot of stuff, so it's something to be aware of. But at the end of the day, to me, I thought this meeting was basically about how do we get good tenants.
Well, I mean, you know, we're going to be wrapping up soon anyways. What I would recommend is for those that are listening in on the call, if you have questions, do you want to kind of maybe ask your question, the Q&As now, so that we can maybe touch on those topics if we haven't already touched on them?
That sounds good. Let me just throw out two things. One, two resources. One is Brickwork, which is somebody that Christina works with, and I've had some dealings with them too. They're a great resource for exactly what she was talking about, ADU. You can you pay a fee, whatever it is, and they'll go and they'll tell you, can you put an ADU here? What are the restrictions? How big? Blah, 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 blah. Awesome service, Brickwork. They really are. Second one, and this is when I first got my rental property 20-something years ago, I belong to the Apartment Owners Association. They're still in existence. They're big advocates for landlords, and I think it's $79 a year. Anybody you put into, you know, if they're going to buy a duplex, their first little income property or sell it, tell them, join that. You'll get a lot of information, a lot of resources, everything else. So Apartment Owners Association and Brickwork. Now, any questions?
I have a question.
Okay.
Thank you so much for all the great information, but I had a questions regarding after the tenant moves out, you know how the landlord still has the deposit, and they always ask me, oh, can I keep this deposit because I'm gonna, you know, paint and, you know, do the repairs. How do I deal with that?
I'll take that. You've got they've got 30 days to give them their deposit back.
21 days, actually.
Okay, I'm sorry. Yeah,
21.
21, exactly, 21 days. But it's minus repairs and stuff. So you better have receipts for all the repairs, all the work, and it's got to be more than what's reasonable wear and tear. So I don't know that. What's that?
And you also, it's also the based on your lease amount, the length of time. So now if it's less than 1 year, you can actually charge them for the painting and, you know, the minor wear and tears. If it's anything a year and over, you cannot charge them for repainting and
Not true.
what?
Not true. There's nothing, normal wear and tear is not defined. That's
It is
part of the
very,
problem
it's
with
very
it.
vague. Yeah.
It's extremely vague. You can look it up, and I would suggest to any investor, anybody looking to buy a property, that you define it the way you see it.
Mhm.
That way, at the end of the lease term, there's no surprises for anybody. If you deliver the property freshly painted, perfectly deep cleaned, and you get it back 18 months, 2 years later, and it's pretty trashed and there's dirt everywhere, and it's going to cost you hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of dollars, and then you have a tenant that goes, well, normal wear and tear means I shouldn't have to pay for paint. I'm sorry, I don't think that's normal. I don't live like that. Maybe they're pigs. Maybe they live like
Right.
that.
Well,
I'm
let me just
very
jump in
careful.
quick. Let me just jump in quick. You can avoid a lot of that with the move in, move out form. It's on car, Memo, and you go with the person when they're moving in, and it's like that window was cracked. This is and it goes through everything in super detail. MIMO, Memo. And then it has the date, and they sign it, and you sign it, done. And then when they move out, okay, this is the way I'm getting it now. So
I think to answer Kimberly's actual question, though, is that it depends on the situation. If it wasn't defined prior to them moving in, you have to ask yourself, what is normal and reasonable wear and tear on the unit, the appliances with daily normal use?
absolutely.
Big scratch or dirt or something got spilled, coffee stains on the wall, that's not normal. And you can deduct that. If you put in brand new hardwood floors and you get them back and they're all scratched up because the tenant had a dog, that's not normal. So you have to be reasonable. There's a general rule of thumb that a property would normally be repainted about every 3 years. So if you have a tenant that's been living in a property for 2 years and they leave, and it requires more than just touch-ups to, you know, little holes where they've hung pictures and stuff like that, you have an argument to repaint it, but it gets murky and people get pissed off. So I just suggest that you ask the person before they lease it with your leasing agent, you know, you basically say, what condition do you expect this property to come back at the end of your 1 year lease? And if you can spell it out, I mean, I spell out security deposit deductions may include boom, 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 boom. This is and we do the memo like Tim said. But, you know, if there's a little bit of a chip on the molding or something like that, is that normal wear and tear? Sure. If the whole thing is scratched up by somebody's dog, like the doors in my house are, it's not.
Yeah. Another thing that you can do to kind of help your landlords is to implement what the cleaning cost is going to be upfront. You know, certain fees that you know you're going to collect on, have it in your lease agreement. So there's no argument. There's no argument about it. Like there's certain clients that I've had that said they're going to automatically charge $450 for cleaning no matter what the condition of the property is. At the minimum, they'll charge $450. So that's just something that you establish from the very beginning so that there's no guessing games about it, you know?
But be careful of that too. I've done that too. I've done all of these. I've tried all of this. So, and Tim, maybe you have too, but be careful of that as well, because if you put in an automatic cleaning fee, you're going to get the property back in a hell of a lot worse condition than you may expect it to be. And if that's 4 years later, that $300, $400 cleaning fee may turn into $800. Just went through it last year. COVID, 3 young girls, they were like very quiet, great tenants, always paid their rent, but never cleaned the property the entire year they were there, not once. I thought I was going to have to replace the shower doors because the hard water stains were so bad on them. Toilets, I mean, it was horrific. It was $1,500 to get that place clean. Forget anything else.
All right.
So 300 didn't cover it.
All right,
So
well,
just be careful.
Enough horror stories. Are there any other questions? No? Come on. Somebody has to have a question.
Tim, Kevin Chang asked for a link for the Apartment Owners Association. I put it in the chat, but just double check. That was the link that I found, but if you can just double check that's the one, or if there's a different link for that.
Oh yeah, that looks like it. That looks like it. Yeah.
Okay.
USA, exactly.
Great.
AOAUSA.com. Yep. And you know, they
There's
send
one
you
for
a
LA as well. There's one
Right.
called the, which is a little more specific to our nuances. I think it's the Greater Apartment Association of Los Angeles or something.
yeah, this one I don't have one right here right now, but they send you, oh yeah, I do. Hold on. They send you every month, you get a little magazine here, Apartment Owners Association. And it's LA specific, definitely. Yeah. California, all that. I mean, and it's thick and it's a lot of BS and a lot of vendors, but it's good to belong to it. Before I used Rent Spree, I could use that for credit checks.
It is actually the one that is in the link, Paula, is actually the US one.
I believe it is, yes.
I'll
I
put
believe-
the LA one.
Say that again.
So we're going to be wrapping up in the next couple of minutes. Does anyone else have any questions about any of the topics that we talked about or anything else pertaining to lease?
Great, we can end early.
Ha!
Okay, Dave Park. That's a question in the chat.
Mildew issues, just
It says-
painting and rented and the paint.
How about without treating mold or mildew issues, just painted and rented, then paint got peeled off and show the mold and mildew signs, then ... who is liable?
Landlord.
I would say the landlord, you got to say if there's mold or mildew, you got to take care of that. There must be a leak or something somewhere.
ASAP, like
Yeah,
that's
because tenants can sue you for putting them in a hazardous
automatic.
environment.
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah, and then there are all these little forms that you've got to send them that I don't know how often, it's about lead paint, that the place was built before, so-and-so, there might be lead paint, there might be asbestos, might be all this stuff to scare the crap out of them,
But that's, I mean, you have to have all those disclosures,
Absolutely.
So those are part of the disclosures that you have to have with your lease contract. And that's where my point of
That's
the
where your value
leases-
comes in.
Well, what I'm saying is that
Yeah.
leases also include a lot of the transaction contracts, the disclosures, like a purchase would, without the glory and the return, So just letting you know, it's not just filling out one little application. They submit it, they send you a lease and you sign it. It doesn't end that way.
Right.
I
I have a question, maybe for Christina. When you're working with your renters and they're looking for a place, and you say, okay, I may have to charge you if we find you a place. What percent do you charge them? Again, if
at the
this is the
minimum
renter.
2.5.
Two
If
and a half.
it's not-
Yeah.
If it's not cooperating,
Right.
yeah, 2.5.
And the tenant's going to have to pay you 2.5.
Yeah.
Okay. Just curious.
Yeah, I mean, I've had experiences where I've but you know, more times than not, they end up picking properties that are listed by agents that are conducted because they have a protocol that they follow. It feels more like it's an up and up sometimes when it's directly with the landlord, you know.
And I would say, and
yeah.
I would just want to say something. Someone else had mentioned, I don't know if it was you or Charlotte, and I found this, when you start getting rentals that are maybe $3,000 a month and under, those landlords are not looking to pay, you know, a real estate agent. And those usually don't end up on the internet all over the place. Those are the ones, by and large, are sticking the sign in the front.
That's not
And
always
maybe
the
going
case.
to, not always, but I'm saying more often than not for me. If if someone tells me I'm looking for, you know, a place for $2,500, I'm like, I don't know that I can. I'm not going to have that much more access than you have yourself.
Yeah,
That's exactly what
I don't help people if they come to me and they say, a renter comes to me and says, I need to find a place for $2,500. I don't help them. I say, I'm so sorry, but you know, and I'll pass it out to someone else.
Right.
But if a client tells me I need to list my property for $2,500, then I'll take that listing. But I'm not going to take on a renter.
Got it.
Yeah.
I think it's a little bit different though, Christina. I think you're dealing with a lot of investors who are buying condos and stuff like that. And I think you probably do have an idea of what those go for. But these little mom and pop, you know, 1920s, 1930s buildings, I'd say these days, what I'm seeing is the majority of the ones that are under probably even $4,000, $4,500, $4,000 are doing it on their own. And they're doing just fine. And so it's just a matter of looking on, you know, Zillow.
I don't take on renter clients per se so much. I'll be honest.
Not even for listings. Even for listings. I mean, somebody called me the other day and asked, she said, am I asking too little? She was asking 4,000 and she was hoping that she was going to do what Tim was doing. And she said, I feel like I'm not getting good quality applicants. And, you know, there's a price point that's quality, and we kind of probably all know what that is. And it's the type of person that you want. I mean, you know, you get 4 roommates in 1 unit, good luck.
Yeah, I do have that conversation with my investors because we have, especially in the last 2 years, we've been approached with a lot of roommate situations. And we see that often with like the higher priced homes, like if it's in the 4,000, 5,000 price point, it's easier for them to get into a nicer place if they collaborate their finances, right? Now, I've also encountered when they move out, it's a nightmare and a half. And then also in the middle of it, they'll say, oh, one guy got a job offer somewhere else and they have to then bring in another, or they can no longer afford that place anymore because of the one roommate that X'd out, whatever. So it becomes more trouble than not. I'll be honest, I'm looking specifically for like families that may be kind of like
fair housing.
I know, but looking for some, you know, like, so I do give my professional advice of this is something that you may have to anticipate with like roommate situations. They're not really long-term tenants. They're going to be kind of here, maybe a year, maybe 2. They're more likely going to move within the first 2 years than not. And so if my client's okay with that, then we proceed. But then I also, you know, again, like I said, these young kids, they don't have credit and so on and so forth. And then they pass the buck onto each other. That's the problem, you know?
Guarantors, there's a line. It's
Parents, yeah,
guarantor
get those parents to sign it. Exactly, the guarantor.
But that's also another thing, like, you know, that's a landlord decision to make. I don't personally accept guarantors. And the reason why is because even though the parents have the money or guarantee something, there's just been some issues where, you know, they won't equally take responsibility. And one parent is not going to take responsibility for all of the kids that are living.
I make them. I disagree. I make them. I will not take roommates unless there is one person in the group that can afford the entire apartment.
Yeah.
And so if I have 3 bedrooms, if I've taken situations with 3 roommates, each roommate must have credit score over 700. Each roommate must be gainfully employed. And they think if they pull their money together, they qualify. It doesn't qualify for me. Well,
No.
if they seem like good people that would make good tenants and they're going to be quiet and they're not going to cause a disturbance and they fit into the building environment well, I will do it. But I know that they're going to stay a year, maybe 2 max. And I will only do it with a guarantor. The leases are joint and several. And what that means is that if one of their roommates gets another job in the other side of the country, it's not my problem. It's theirs. And they have to find somebody, they have to find a way to pay the rent. And if they want to get a new roommate, that person has to be run through me.
Yeah, I agree. I've had roommate applicants. 2 of them are fantastic, phenomenal. And then they've got that one, deal breaker guy. You know what I mean? The baggage of the group. And I've had to turn down numerous times of clients that just all 3 didn't qualify. Every single one has to. So.
Or it's TikTok star and their friends.
Hey, don't knock it. My daughter's a TikTok star, right?
Wow.
Hey, my tenant's a TikTok star, but he's in his 50s and he makes 60 grand a month. So it's fine.
All right. Well, this was fun, guys.
Yeah, we're at 2:00.
Yeah. So I've got to get to my next meeting now. But again,
Same
this
here.
office is one thing I think about this office that's so fantastic is that, yes, they provide these platforms for everybody to get a little bit of more insight onto topics that may not be very familiar, but you're also surrounded by people that are reachable too. So if you got a question that may have not been touched on or you want to elaborate on, call Paula. She'll give you our phone numbers, except mine. I'm just kidding.
I was going to say, call Christina. Just call Christina.
And you can reach out and make those initiative conversations and those specific questions directly to the person that may best address it. All right.
Excellent.
Thank
All
you
right,
guys so
everybody.
much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tim.
Thanks a
Thank you,
lot.
Charlotte. Thank you, Christina. Have a good day, everybody.
All right.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.